Good morning. It's really good to be back at CBS. I've been out for about 3 weeks, and I think Shelley maybe mentioned to some of y'all that I've been in Australia visiting my son and daughter-in-law and their new baby. And I had a lot of anxiety about riding a plane for that long and going that far, but I can attest that the Lord is faithful in Australia just like He is in Lubbock, Texas. So that was a relief. Some of you maybe heard that my little grandson, something that was not on the itinerary was that he got sick. He's just 6 weeks old and he got RSV there. Had to go into the hospital and spend 3 days there. His name is Paxson, and his other grandmother also attends CBS. And I believe she's in Velma Ruth's core group. I know she had y'all praying for him. And I certainly had the leadership group, which is my core group, praying for him. And it just really encouraged me that there's a group, we all have a group of ladies here in this community that we can reach out to and say, will you pray? And you know they will. And I hope that you're finding that in your core group, and I want you to encourage you to utilize those relationships because it really was and is important to me. So thank y'all for letting me share that. So in preschool today, they are continuing their study in Moses, and today they're learning about how God provided manna for the Israelites. And I have a little granddaughter who is hearing that lesson right now, and I told my daughter last night that's what she's going to learn, and she was like, oh, I love that lesson. That's what God's teaching me right now. And the word that they're learning is provide. God will provide. And so moms, if you have preschoolers, I hope you'll talk to them about that lesson they're learning and ask them and point out to them how God is providing for you, for them, for y'all's family, because it's really, that is an important thing that we can never really learn too many times, right? In the next gym classes, they're studying Goliath just like us. And, I just love that memory verse, and what a great memory verse for not only all of us, but for young adults, for youth, to learn that man looks at the outward appearance. Everything in the world is telling us that's where our worth is, but that God looks at the heart. And I especially love this story about David, who, our study told us in the commentary that he was probably about 15 years old. And so all of our students can really identify with David. And David was among all those adults, and yet he and his faith, through his faith, set an example and teaches us even today. And so I'm really excited about what those kids are learning back there. All the classes have this giant Goliath poster that is 9 feet 9 inches, which is however many cubits they said that he was. And they're standing up beside him to see the giant that David faced. So that's a cool object lesson. So you can ask your students about what they thought about that. Thanks.
Thank you, ladies. That was just beautiful. I don't remember if Lindsay said it or not, but 3 of these ladies are your CBS sisters. And so you may have seen them in core group or Naomi working in children's. So we are so grateful that they shared with us this morning their gift of song. Welcome to Community Bible Study in Lubbock, Texas. I'm Shana Underwood, the Associate Teaching Director. What a blessing it is to share this time with you today as we continue with 1 Samuel 16 and 17. I think Max Lucado paints the picture best. The slender, beardless boy kneels by the brook. Mud moistened his knees. Bubbling water cools his hand. Were he to notice, he could study his handsome features in the water. Hair the color of copper, tan Seguin skin, and eyes that steal the breath of Hebrew maidens. He searches not for his reflection, however, but for rocks. Stones, smooth stones, the kind that stack neatly in a shepherd's pouch, rest flush against a shepherd's leather sling, flat rocks that balance heavy in the palm and missile with comet-crashing force into the head of a lion, a bear, or in this case, a giant. Goliath stares down the hillside. Only disbelief keeps him from laughing. He and his Philistine herd have rendered their half of the valley into a forest of spears. A growling, bloodthirsty gang of hoodlums boasting do-rags, BO, and barbed wire tattoos. Goliath towers over them all, 9 foot 9 inches tall in his stocking feet, wearing 125 pounds of armor, snarling like the main contender at the Worldwide Wrestling Federation Championship at night. He wears a size 20 collar and a size 56-inch belt. His biceps burst, thigh muscles ripple, and he boasts a belch through the canyon. This day, I defy the ranks of Israel. Give me a man and let's fight each other. Who will go mano a mano? Give me your best shot. No Hebrew volunteers. Until today. Until David. Pray with me. Lord, ears that hear and eyes that see, you made them both. And as we look together at this story this morning, help us to see, hear, and absorb what you want. Guide our hearts in this moment. Bless these words that you allow me to speak and share. Amen. Max's words take us right there. They paint a vivid picture, right to the edge of that brook with that handsome and bold young man preparing himself for the task at hand. The Lord has brought him to this place, to this position. The Lord has placed the young David right where he intended for him to be. 1 Samuel 16 offers us a glimpse at the way David has come to this precise place. It begins with the Lord and his instructions to Samuel to get up, to get going, to move past his grief and his dismay over the failures of Saul as king. The Lord called it all along. Saul was going to fail and struggle. He was going to fall short despite the efforts of Samuel to encourage and steer, guide and provide wise, godly counsel. And the Lord has rejected Saul as king over Israel. The Lord is leading and guiding Samuel to his chosen one. And this is going to require Samuel to go out on a limb. It's going to require Samuel to obey and listen to the Lord as he is led to the one of God's choosing. Samuel's no dummy. He knows what the Lord is asking of him is going to put him at risk. But Samuel has a long history with God. He trusts God to lead and to protect and to show the way. So despite his concerns over Saul, he sets out just as the Lord has instructed. In 1 Samuel 16:3, the Lord gives instructions to Samuel to include Jesse in the sacrifice and the worship, and God says, I will show you what to do, and you shall anoint for me whom I declare to you. And we're told clearly in verse 4 that Samuel did what the Lord commanded. Samuel goes to Bethlehem, walks through the process of identifying God's chosen one, and the Lord said in verse 7, do not look on his appearance or on his height or of stature, because I have rejected him. For the Lord sees not as man sees. Man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. Let's think about the sense of sight for a minute. Our vision is the sense that is viewed most by the modern world as the most important of the senses. The sense of sight is responsible for most of the information that we absorb and we take in. It pulls in more information than all of the other senses that we have combined. The use of our eyes helps us to interpret the world around us. It helps us make sense of everything. The act of seeing is an amazing and miraculous thing, and yet we are clearly told in this passage that human sight is limited in its scope. Godly vision is far superior. God sees what we miss. Hearts are not in our purview. I recently saw an ad on Facebook. There's a million of them, right? This one was for a remote controller of sorts. This device can detect hidden cameras that are hidden in various places and hidden so well that we overlook them altogether. The device lights up, it flashes, it's kind of like an electric version of the old hot and cold game. When you're not near a hidden camera, then the device is cold. No reaction, it doesn't light up. But when you're in the hot zone and a camera is lurking nearby, then the device blinks and lights up and makes a fuss and lets you know, ding, 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 one's right there, one's hiding. Would it not be nice as humans to have a device like this at our disposal, with the ability to do a heart check on the people that we come into contact with? Maybe on prospective employees or friends, on a potential spouse, or on the boys that knock on your front doors to take your daughter to the high school dance? Is this person loyal and true? Blinking lights, ding, 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 or cold response, no reaction. Is this person honest, hardworking? What does the device tell us? Here the Lord is measuring the heart. The Lord sees with insight and clarity into the very heart of man, and when David is finally brought to Samuel as an afterthought, after each of his 7 older brothers have paraded before Samuel, all to be rejected, at last he says in verse 12, "Arise, anoint him, this is he." David is described in the Message as being the picture of health, bright eyes, good looking. The ESV describes him as sunburned with beautiful eyes and handsome. The mentioning of his eyes made me think about Matthew 6:22 through 23, which says, "The eye is the lamp of the body. If your eye is healthy, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. If the light in you is darkness, how great is that darkness?" Our eyes have been said to be the windows to our souls. No one really seems to know who to attribute first to this sentiment, but it's almost always related back to Matthew 6. It speaks to the glimpsing of another's spiritual condition, as seen in their eyes. It refers also to someone's spiritual sight, eyes that perceive more than what is available to the naked eye, and eyes that focus on God, on His power, on His goodness, surely will reflect His light to others. David is the one chosen by God. God has evaluated David's heart and has instructed Samuel to anoint him, and then in verse 13, the Spirit of the Lord rushed upon David from that day forward. The presence of the Lord's Spirit at work in David will be seen and used as David's story unfolds. He too will have to look at what is in front of him from a perspective that differs from those around him. His perspective will be influenced by God's Spirit at work within him. All future rulers will be compared to David. He's viewed as a Messiah figure. David is known as having a genuine heart for God. He is seen as someone who was accepting of God's ultimate authority. David, a precursor to the one greater than he. David, the unlikely choice. The one I'm sure every soldier would have picked to be on their side last. The youngest son, the one most would overlook and underestimate. This one, God selected. Isaiah 53, 2-3 says, "For he grew up before him like a young plant, and like a root out of dry ground. He had no form or majesty that we should look at him, and no beauty that we should desire him. He was despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. And as one from whom men hide their faces, he was despised, and we esteemed him not." Jesus, the Messiah, the carpenter's son with a common identity and a common family tree, not the picture many had in mind. Human perspective fails. But God sees, not as man sees. As the Spirit of the Lord rushes upon David, Yahweh departs from Saul, leaving him tormented, despondent, in despair, leading Saul's servants to seek comfort for him in the form of a musician. God positions David in Saul's royal court. David has some prerequisite skills, after all. One of Saul's servants speaks in 1 Samuel 16:8, saying, "Behold, I have seen the son of Jesse, the Bethlehemite, who is skillful in playing, a man of valor, a man of war, prudent in speech, a man of good presence, and the Lord is with him." A perfect and apt description of the chosen David would be just what Saul needed. David is positioned once again right where God wanted him. Don't you know that David was wondering if this service in this royal court was what all that anointing business with Samuel was all about in the first place? Don't you wonder what was going on in his mind as he tended to Saul and comforted him and became his right-hand man and became beloved by the king himself? Do you wonder if David questioned this service? We simply don't know, but what we do see is David's obedience as he tends to Saul, much like his obedience in tending to his father's sheep. David had found favor in the sight of the king. And when David played, Saul was refreshed and the harmful spirit departed from him. David was being set up for a larger role, and the Spirit of God, no doubt, would provide David with added strength and courage and power, everything necessary for the tasks that had been supernaturally assigned to David. As David served, he did not have the position to see past the tormented king in front of him. We do not always see beyond where we are at any given moment. We don't always grasp the role that we're meant to play in the bigger scheme of things. We don't always have a view of the next thing or the next opportunity or what's around the next bend or even how our lives will ultimately mesh with God's will. But God sees even if man doesn't. God's sight is superior. His vantage is clear. As many of you know, we lived a spring and a summer of hard with the terminal illness of my mother-in-law, Anne. It was a trial and a struggle for our whole family. It was grueling and gut-wrenching, and it was a balancing act. As we lived with the tension of hope for her improvement and smacked it in the face with what we were staring, face to face right with. My father-in-law struggled greatly, as you can imagine, getting up every day to literally fight the battle in front of him, to reconcile what the doctors were saying, which wasn't good, with his promise to her not to give up, to keep fighting. And as we neared the end and she became weaker and weaker and less responsive, the cancer literally consuming her very life, he was fighting us tooth and nail over every decision. The smallest decisions to the largest decisions. That is until a few days before she died. And her doctor made a home visit to spend some time and some powerful minutes praying over us, over Anne, and talking with him alone. After that discussion, Alan finally relinquished the fight. And you could see peace wash over him. Her doctor reassured him that Alan had fought the fight to the best of his human ability. But now the Lord was calling her home. Alan just couldn't see it or accept it until he did. Later, he told us, I was just so busy fighting the cancer that I forgot to look up. And when he finally looked up, things became clearer. God brought the clarity. And in an instant, this husband's new role was understood. His role in that moment came into focus. His new role was now to just serve, to love, to encourage, to lean in, to be there, and to see Anne through her final days without regret, rather than to wage war tooth and nail against the cancer. God sees what man does not. And when we spend time with him, listening in prayer and leaning in close, our sight on the matters at hand change. We see our role in the light that the Lord casts. In chapter 17, we return to where we started this morning, David preparing to face off with Goliath, the chosen David, the unlikely underdog. He wasn't even old enough to serve in the army, but he was the only one brave enough to step up in defense of Israel and in defense of the army of the living God. David sees Goliath and his attacks as blasphemy towards God, and as Saul and every other hardened soldier cowered in fear, the shepherd boy prepares. David's view of Goliath is never about Goliath. It's all about the Lord. David spends less time thinking about Goliath or ruminating over his own fears and more time thinking about the God that he serves. David thinks less about what others think about him, even as you know they were gawking and discussing his boldness. Instead, he thinks more about the bigness of the God he loves. David stands in stark contrast to Goliath. Small, young, less experience in life, no experience in battle, but mighty in faith and mighty and bold in action. All for the living God. He's been prepared with the heart of a warrior, with the heart of a protector who tends to those who can't tend for themselves. He's gone to great lengths to protect the flock from bear and from lion, and to put himself in harm's way for the good of his innocent flock. And he is prepared to do it again regardless of the giant standing in front of him, regardless of the rank and file soldiers who have trembled in fear and ducked and ran for cover. Max Lucado writes, David shows up discussing God. The soldiers never mentioned a thing about him. His brothers never spoke his name, but David takes one step onto the stage and raises the subject of the living God. He does the same thing with King Saul. No chit-chat about the battle or questions about the odds, just a God-birthed announcement. The Lord delivered me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear. He will deliver me from the hand of the Philistine. Goliath continues to mock David, and the shepherd boy replies, You come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will hand you over to me, and I'll strike you down and cut your head off. Today I will give your carcasses to the birds of the air and the beasts of the earth, and the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel. All of those gathered here will know it is not by sword or by spear that the Lord saves, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give all of you into our hands. David sees what others do not. David is willing to do what no one else on that hill, in that valley, is willing to do. David sees the giant before him. Of course he does. How can he miss him? But David's focus is less giant, more God. David loaded his slingshot and he took aim, and to me it was as if the angels put X marks the spot, dead center, Goliath's head. And in one fateful shot, the giant of the man drops to the ground. The battle is won. The chosen one has triumphed over the enemy of God. The unlikely war hero has defeated the giant and prevailed. God knew David's heart. God had prepared him. God did not doubt David's follow-through or his courage. And even though Saul remains king at this point, David has now been revealed as God's chosen leader for all the people to see. Who could deny God's hand here? This was a defining moment for David, and Saul can't help but notice. God sees what man does not. We are also chosen by God. We've been grafted into his family. Our names are written on the palms of his hands, and we have battles to fight too. Our battles are sometimes physical in nature, and sometimes mental or spiritual, and sometimes caused by no fault of our own. We will all face giants in this life. We will all have to fight certain battles. When you're terrified and you've lost all hope, what is it your eyes see? When you struggle and you come up against the hurts and the worries of this life, what do your eyes tell you? Do you retreat? Do you get consumed with worry? Do you become paralyzed with fear and overwhelmed? Do you invite God into your battles, or do you go at them alone? Do you ever focus more on the giant in front of you over the God that cares for you? I have 33 giants facing me right now. I've taken an account of each one. The combination of the 33 has made me feel attacked at every angle. Any one of these 33 wake me up, deprive me of sleep, deprive me of peace, rob me of joy. Listing them line by line in my prayer journal was an overwhelming exercise. Each one standing alone can literally take my breath away, consume my thoughts, and leave me pervasively heavy-hearted. These 33 run the gamut, and as I'm sure yours does too. Some are big, some are seemingly small, some are intricate, others are smoldering. Some are flat, complicated, and have longevity on their side. I've actually stopped looking at the list as a whole because it was too much. It was too overwhelming, and now I've bundled them all together and given them a new name: the whole enchilada. They are easier for me to look at bundled that way. They're easier for me to talk to God about. God knows the details of the entire list, the entire 33. He knows the ins and the outs and the ups and the downs. Like me, you have a list of worries and struggles and giant concerns, and you may be focused on your enchilada so much that you fail to see God. But what if we changed the way that we looked at our giants? What if, like David, we gave more thought to God than the giants that plague us? What if we remembered that we don't have to face our giants alone, even though we have to face them? What if we lifted our eyes to the one who truly sees? What if we took aim at what was tormenting us with God's help? What if we relied on God with every battle and brought him with us to every fight? What if we leaned closer and allowed God to share his perspective with us? What if I handed God my whole enchilada? After all, he sees what we do not. Pray with me. Lord, let us see you and hear you more fully every single day. Be with us in our daily battles. Guide our hearts and our minds as we walk in this world through every struggle that we face. You are our help. You are exactly what we need right now. In Jesus' name, amen.